Hello and good day, everyone. My name is Darlena Birch, MBA, RDN, and most importantly, public health dietitian. Welcome to my YouTube channel where I discuss U.S. federal nutrition programs, the important role they play in ensuring the health and well-being of all Americans, and how public health dietitians work tirelessly to support these amazing programs. Today, I'm going to talk about glyphosate, the herbicide you likely never knew but probably consume a fair amount of. First, let's discuss a couple definitions that I want to get us all to understand. An herbicide is a substance that is toxic to plants and it's used to destroy unwanted vegetation. A pesticide is a substance used for destroying insects or other organisms harmful to cultivated plants or animals. Therefore, glyphosate is an herbicide since it's used to kill weeds. Glyphosate is a non-selective phosphonomethyl amino acid herbicide registered to control weeds in various agricultural and non-agricultural settings. The herbicide acts by inhibiting the 5-enolpyruvylshikimate 3-phosphate synthase enzyme, which is not present in mammalian systems. Darlena, can you please speak English? Okay, yeah, sure. In other words, glyphosate is a non-selective herbicide. What this means is that it will kill most plants, and glyphosate does this by preventing plants from making certain proteins that are needed for growth. You see, it stops a specific enzyme pathway, the shikimic acid pathway. The shikimic acid pathway is necessary for plants and some microorganisms. The shikimic pathway is a 7-step metabolic pathway used by bacteria, archaea, fungi, algae, some protozoans, and plants for the biosynthesis of folates and aromatic amino acids such as phenylalanine, tyrosine, and tryptophan. Now, shout out to my Darlena's Kitchen episodes, where in my carbohydrate episode, I talk about how plants synthesize their own energy. In my amino acids episode, I touched on the essential and non-essential amino acids and how they play a role in cellular function. So that's right, ultimately herbicides work by inhibiting the biological processes within a plant itself. Now back to glyphosate. Initially registered in 1974, glyphosate has since undergone several human health analyses. In 1986, the EPA issued the glyphosate registration standard, which updated the agency's toxicity database for this compound. In 1993, the EPA issued the registration eligibility decision that indicated that glyphosate was eligible for re-registration. Long story short, glyphosate is a widely used herbicide that has been registered in the US since 1974. Now, glyphosate targets a broad range of weeds, and it's important in the production of fruits, vegetables, nuts, and glyphosate-resistant field crops such as corn and soybean. It's effective at managing invasive and noxious weeds, and in addition, glyphosate breaks down in the environment, can be used for no-till and low-till farming, which can reduce soil erosion, and is useful for integrated pest management. Agricultural uses include corn, cotton, canola, soybean, sugar beet, alfalfa, berry crops, brassica vegetables, bulb vegetables, fruiting vegetables, leafy vegetables, legume vegetables, cucurbit vegetables, root tuber vegetables, cereal grains, grain sorghum, citrus crops, fallow, herbs and spices, orchards, tropical and subtropical fruits, stone fruits, palm fruits, nuts, vine crops, oilseed crops, and sugarcane. Non-agricultural uses include conservation land, pastures, rangeland, aquatic areas, forests, turf grass, residential areas, non-food tree crops such as pine, poplar, and Christmas trees, rights of ways, commercial areas, paved areas, spot treatments, ornamentals, parks, and wildlife management areas. Okay, Darlena, so why this long-winded introduction into glyphosate and its agricultural and non-agricultural uses? One, I want to ensure I'm providing enough background for you to understand what glyphosate is. Two, I'm trying to connect the dots for you between my Darlena's Kitchen episodes and my public health episodes. And three, I want you to understand how pervasive the use of glyphosate is in our environment. So now we understand that glyphosate is a commonly used herbicide. But wait, there's more. Glyphosate is used not only as an herbicide, but it is also used as a desiccant. Darlena, why do you keep introducing terms I don't understand? It's cool, guys. I'm going to tell you what a desiccant is right now. A desiccant is a drying agent. You see, desiccants have a high affinity for water and are used as drying agents on pre-harvested crops. Dare I say, desiccants are hydrophilic, aka water-loving, and therefore they draw moisture out. Don't worry, this will make more sense when I post this Thursday's episode on micronutrients, where I talk about hydrophilic and hydrophobic interactions. Anyways, pre-harvest crop desiccation refers to the application of a substance to a crop just before harvest to kill the leaves and/or plants so that the crop dries out from environmental conditions more quickly and evenly. This is also known as dry down. Therefore, in agriculture, the term desiccant is applied to an agent that promotes dry down. Thus, the agents used are not chemical desiccants, but rather herbicides and or defoliants used to artificially accelerate the drying of a plant's tissues. Desiccation of crops through the use of herbicides is practiced worldwide on a variety of food and non-food crops. Now, if you come this far and you're like, Darlena, how come I've never heard of the name glyphosate before? Well, I'm going to ask you this. Have you ever heard of the product Roundup Ready or Roundup? Do you have a bottle of Roundup sitting in your garage or shed right now? Are you envisioning the commercials right now as I speak? Picturing a weed or dandelion shriveling away right as the Roundup is sprayed directly on it? Yep, that's glyphosate. Or rather, glyphosate is the active ingredient in Roundup. Roundup, aka glyphosate, was produced by Monsanto, the controversial chemical company that has developed a notorious reputation for lawsuits against farmers. Now, I do want to say I grew up in St. Louis, so growing up, a lot of my friends' parents actually worked for Monsanto, so it wasn't until I went to college in another state that I learned that Monsanto had a less than pristine image. Okay, Darlena, I still don't understand why I should care. Hang on, guys, hang on. In 2019, the National Public Radio published an article regarding glyphosate and reported that in 3 civil cases so far, U.S. juries had ordered Roundup's inventor, Monsanto, now owned by Bayer, to pay enormous damages to cancer survivors, with thousands more lawsuits having been filed. For this chemical and for Monsanto, it's a stunning change in fortunes. You see, the controversy surrounding glyphosate has been ebbing and flowing for years. First used in 1974, as I stated earlier, there wasn't much attention given to its use as an herbicide for the first 20 years it existed. But in 1996, with Monsanto selling genetically modified crops, farmers began to spray Roundup directly onto their GMO corn, soybeans, and cotton, which were modified to tolerate glyphosate. It was genius in the sense that the crops could live and the weeds would die, and you didn't have to try and target the glyphosate to be sprayed on one versus the other. So we're gonna fast forward about a decade or so onto March 20th, 2015, when the International Agency for Research on Cancer, a part of the World Health Organization, announced its conclusion that glyphosate is probably carcinogenic to humans. Now, this upset the executives at Monsanto, who then launched a public relations campaign and attacked the IARC. So much drama, guys, so much drama. As is the way with drama, the picture quickly grew even more complicated as other government agencies, including the U.S. Environmental Protection Agency and the European Food Safety Authority, took a new look at glyphosate. Their conclusion? It's probably not giving people cancer. Why the disagreement amongst these organizations and agencies? Well, there's 3 primary reasons that was highlighted in the NPR article. 1, apparently the IARC looked at whether or not glyphosate can cause cancer. Government agencies, however, looked at whether it will cause cancer after considering how much glyphosate people are actually exposed to. The second reason is that these agencies actually look at different evidence. Regulatory agencies like the EPA and others actually considered evidence that wasn't publicly available because Monsanto paid for the evidence and submitted them to these agencies. So for my science-based majors out there, do any of you guys recall being taught about how when considering scientific research, you should always check who funded the study to make sure it's completely free from bias? Because if Monsanto is paying for the research, how am I supposed to have 100% confidence that the researchers didn't somehow feel pressured to manipulate the data in Monsanto's favor? Monsanto, can I and the rest of the American public see these studies? I'm just curious as all. I just don't understand why it has to be secret. You see, the IARC didn't look at most of the research that the EPA and other groups did because it accepts only studies that are publicly available. This allows any other scientists to see exactly what IARC's conclusions were based on. However, I do want to say that there are scientists out there who think that company-financed studies are credible and valuable despite the potential conflict of interest for companies carrying out those studies. Guys, I'm just not buying it. The third reason is that even when looking at the same data, scientists will disagree about what the data means. Okay, so I've listed 3 reasons for why there's disagreement regarding glyphosate and its capacity to cause cancer. Regardless of these disagreements, glyphosate did actually go to court with 3 civil lawsuits in or near San Francisco. So what was Monsanto being sued over? Glyphosate's capacity to cause cancer in its victims. All 3 trials ended with resounding verdicts in favor of the cancer victims, and the juries ordered Bayer to pay huge punitive damages. In one case, the jury found that Monsanto knew for decades of the product's hazards and not only failed to warn customers, but schemed to publicly discredit the evidence. In a more recent case, the damages totaled $2 billion, and I'll say another court did sharply lower that amount. But can I get 0.005% of that? Because I have some student loans I need to pay off. As of June 2020, NPR reported that Bayer agreed to pay more than $10 billion to resolve cancer lawsuits over the Roundup weed killer, as thousands more were filed against them. These suits have been brought by farm workers and others who allege that they developed cancer from years of exposure to Roundup. The $10 billion settlement excludes the 3 lawsuits I previously mentioned, which are in the appeals process, I believe. You see, this is where politics starts to fascinate me. On one side of the aisle, you have people telling you that less regulation is key. You can't trust the government or the regulators because they don't have your best interests at heart. So Republicans, why am I supposed to trust the EPA when they tell me glyphosate is safe? If we are to distrust the regulatory authorities, then why should I trust the EPA's conclusion, which was apparently partially based on secret studies that the public isn't even allowed to see? I mean, maybe these studies are incredibly solid and are free from bias, but how am I supposed to know that if I can't see them for myself? But then on the other side of the aisle, they tell you that expanded government is great and that more regulation is key. So Democrats, do you want me to trust that the EPA came to the right conclusion about glyphosate, even though they based part of the analysis on research that's not available to the public? So much for government transparency. But what I love most about this story is that Monsanto actually did lose in court. You see, this story basically shows that the American public still has power, guys. Monsanto submitted their top secret, not publicly available research to the EPA and got a conclusion in their favor. But the jury wasn't buying it. I mean, are you buying it? So back to glyphosate as a desiccant. If there's one thing I want you to understand from this video, it's that glyphosate is used pervasively as a drying agent, aka desiccant, on pre-harvested oats. Those oats are then harvested for a variety of uses, including human consumption. In 2018 and 2019, the Environmental Watch Group commissioned 3 rounds of laboratory tests of cereals and other foods sold by Kellogg, General Mills, and Quaker, and found glyphosate in 43 of 45 samples of breakfast foods made with conventionally grown oats. Popular oat cereals, oatmeal, granola, and snack bars came with a hefty dose of the weed-killing poison in Roundup. Almost 3/4 of those samples had glyphosate levels higher than what EWG scientists consider protective of children's health, with an adequate margin of safety. About 1/3 of the 16 samples made with organically grown oats also had glyphosate, but they were all at levels well below EWG's health benchmark. Turns out that every year, more than 250 million pounds of glyphosate are sprayed on American crops, primarily on Roundup-ready corn and soybeans genetically engineered to withstand the herbicide. But when it comes to the food that we eat, the highest levels of glyphosate actually are not found in products made with the GMO corn. Increasingly, glyphosate is sprayed just before harvest on wheat, barley, oats, and beans that are not genetically engineered. Glyphosate kills the crop, drying it out so that it can be harvested sooner than if the plant were allowed to die naturally. Okay, so we know that glyphosate is controversial and that most Americans are consuming varying amounts of this herbicide. So let's give the EPA their chance to defend themselves. The EPA states that since glyphosate's first registration, it has reviewed and reassessed its safety and uses, including undergoing registration review, a program that reevaluates each registered pesticide on a 15-year cycle. So EPA did actually put out a call for comment to solicit feedback from the public regarding glyphosate's use as a drying agent on pre-harvested oats. And in January 2020, after receiving and considering public comments on the glyphosate proposed interim decision, EPA released the interim decision for registration review. As part of this action, EPA continues to find that there are no risks of concern to human health when glyphosate is used in accordance with its current label. EPA also found that glyphosate is unlikely to be a human carcinogen, and it's requiring management measures to help farmers target pesticide sprays to intended pests, protect pollinators, and reduce the problem of weeds becoming resistant to glyphosate. EPA states that their scientists performed an independent evaluation of available data for glyphosate and found no risk of concern to human health from current uses of glyphosate, no indication that children are more sensitive to glyphosate, no evidence that glyphosate causes cancer in humans, and no indication that glyphosate is an endocrine disruptor. Now, for the sake of brevity, I did try to keep the conclusions reached by EPA pretty short, but I'm going to include the link to the document in the description box below. So if you want to read in detail how they reached their conclusions and what they specifically had to say with each, then you can click on that link to view. All right, so I've given the EPA their say, but for you viewers out there who do have concerns regarding glyphosate in your oat products, what can you do? So I'm gonna give you 3 tips for combating the presence of glyphosate in the food that you eat. 1, eat organic. When it comes to the nutritional adequacy of organic food versus non-organic food, it's actually comparable. There isn't much difference when it comes to the amount of nutrition. However, I would say that the biggest value in going organic is in the reduced exposure to herbicides and pesticides. The second thing you can do is buy certain brands. Eating organic is expensive, and frankly speaking, it's just not an option that every American can entertain. Therefore, it's important to know which brands care enough about their consumers to comply with their consumers' preferences despite government regulation. One such company is Kellogg, who announced in January 2020 its plans to phase out the use of glyphosate as a pre-harvest drying agent in its wheat and oat supply chain in its major markets, including the United States, by the end of 2025. The third thing you can do is advocate. As I mentioned earlier, the EPA did actually solicit public comments regarding glyphosate use as a drying agent on pre-harvested oats. I know it can be hard to feel like you have a voice, but always remember that you do. As Americans, we have the capacity to advocate and lobby for our best interests. It can often feel like the corporations have all the power to win, but at the end of the day, guess what? We are the corporation's consumers, we fund the government, and therefore we have the power. Thank you for joining me today. If you like what you see, please smash the like button and subscribe to my YouTube channel. And remember, you are your own best advocate. Feed your body well, nourish your soul, nurture your mind, and nutrify your spirit. Remain true to yourself and never forget that every second forward is another opportunity to be a better version of your past self.